Welcome to the Main Street Business Inside Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wagner, Chief Program Officer at Main Street America, a nonprofit leading a collaborative movement dedicated to strengthening communities through place-based economic development and community preservation. Each week, join me as I travel the country and take a deep dive into the personal journeys of downtown and neighborhood entrepreneurs. The stories that far too often go unnoticed and unheard. Whether you're a small business owner who wants to learn from your peers or a community leader looking to better support your local business base, Main Street Business Insights is here to provide you with the tools, strategies, and personal stories to help you and all of your Main Street businesses thrive. So subscribe now and tune in every Wednesday to get inspired by the individuals driving our communities forward. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Main Street Business Inside Podcast. I'm Matt Wagner, Chief Innovation Officer at Main Street America, and your host for the show. And today, our topic du jour is really about the tariffs. And so I'm going to be talking about 12 tips for Main Street businesses for basically how to consider navigating tariffs. So we're not going to go into big definitions about tariffs, but do want to talk about maybe different ways to pivot, shift, look at your business and your business practices to help you to sort of get through and hopefully navigate well, be more resilient as it comes to the world of tariffs. If you haven't been following the media and what's been going on, the United States government is currently engaged in really ongoing negotiations on a host of fronts around international tariffs. And currently, we've got a 10% tariff placed on products from China and a 30-day pause, the latest update on tariffs impacting Mexico and Canada. And so more news to come, obviously, as we approach into March. As such, the situation is quite fluid, as you can imagine. Many of you are probably used to some fluidity over the last 5 years coming out of the pandemic, in which there was a number of shifts that needed to be made. There was a lot of unknowns in terms of consumerism and what was going to change there. Supply chain management was always in flux. And so a lot of the themes that I'll be talking about are really ones that some of you may already be used to and just kind of need to dust off the game plan from the pandemic. But nonetheless, I think from a business perspective, it's really important to build as much resiliency into your operations for these unexpected situations. And really the following is just a series of tips that we've examined and looked at that all business owners, I think, can consider while staying informed, of course, and evaluating any impacts these sort of changes might have on your business characteristics and situation at hand. So let's get started. All right. So first area I want to talk about is really assessing your current supply chain for vulnerable areas. And that's really critical based on the news that we have right now. Understanding how much of your product mix actually comes from these current target areas like Mexico, Canada, or China. And even I would keep a lookout for the European Union. There's been a lot of discussions, nothing, hardcore at this point, but certainly mentions about how they may be a potential target over the coming months. And so I think you need to get ahead of the game if you're importing products from, or that's part of your supply chain or your supplier supply chain, of course, over the next coming months. Recognize that most suppliers will probably plan on making pricing adjustments within 30 days of any noticed tariff, not to get caught up where they're going to create a new price list for you. So try to get ahead of the game, start to assess your current supply chain, where your product's coming from. You probably know instinctually, but it's helpful because different product mixes can change over time. And many of your vendors are probably also doing the same thing. So, better understand kind of where their shifts may be coming from as well. The second area that I want to mention is just knowing your numbers, the hardcore financials of your business. If you're in a high margin business, much like many Main Streets are, simply because we're not typically transactional like a Walmart or an Amazon or something like that. It does tend to be many more like specialty, um, whether it's in the restaurant, food and beverage sectors, or apparel or whatever. We tend to be more on the specialty experiential side, which will typically mean higher margins. So hopefully there's a little bit more wiggle room, unlike a grocery store, for instance, that has very slim margins, that they can sort of shift in order to gain some pricing elasticity with consumers. So hopefully that flexibility may allow you to raise prices less aggressively or be more thoughtful in your approach to pricing, and still make a decent profit margin. I know that's can be difficult, but first get to know where you're at by inventory mix on margins, because not every product has the same margin, obviously. Also, I think, as I mentioned earlier in sort of the setup to the show, I would look back during 2023. You may recall is when I think we were upwards of 8 or 9% inflation. Okay, and essentially tariffs act like that, right? There's a pricing increase because of what's coming in if you're importing into the country, and so it acts as another sort of inflationary sort of juicing the inflation. And so see what you did back then. How did you react? How did your consumers react to some of the price shifts? So recognize that in some ways you've been through this before. Look back. How did you react? What worked? What didn't work? And how did your consumers react? Was there some pushback? Did you see any trickle, off of where your sales numbers were as a result, or at least in sort of like the number of tickets, head count within the store? So this isn't totally new, but just in a different way in terms of what's increasing pressure on your pricing structure. Third is order now and build stock if you're in a position to. Okay. And I know not everyone is in that position. Cash flow can be tight, and or even like the amount of storage you have in the store or in your business, or if you're in the perishable side, it's kind of impossible to do so. But if you are in a position, maybe consider. So if business relies on imported product goods, can you buy more inventory now before these sort of pricing shifts go into play? For example, check out, do you have a line of credit? Again, if sort of cash on hand is not available, do you have a line of credit you could turn to? And then kind of weigh the risk reward of might have to pay some interest, but is that pricing difference of what you're going to see happen as you look ahead going to make that interest is far less than what the price increase is going to be, and so you're coming out ahead relative to margins and just the cost of inventory overall. So kind of weigh the risk there. And another consideration, I think, is just the availability of operational cash flow. It's always important not to get too far out in front of your skis, as they say. And as I mentioned before, if you're dealing with perishables, it really makes it quite tough to be able to do that. So stretch as much as you can, buy if you can, as you forecast out, but recognize your risk tolerance and how much cash on hand you've got to make that happen. All right. I would also advise start researching other suppliers. I think there's going to be quite a bit of shifting going on depending on how intense. I think the China situation is somewhat limited, but if things pop more in Mexico and Canada, if the European Union tariffs, or at least that dialogue gets hotter, it may be worthwhile then starting to research other suppliers to diversify as much as you can, or have sort of a plan B and C if there are shifts there. Consider the location of your suppliers. Where are they sourcing? Understand, get deep there as you can. Have that dialogue. There may be opportunities to diversify simply by location and avoiding countries where a tariff is placed, perhaps coming in from a different route, even. If you can't diversify your supply chain, perhaps try negotiating with your suppliers regarding prices or contracts. If you go out a little bit further, will that alleviate some of the pricing? How long have you been a customer? Can you use that and leverage sort of the tenure and the relationship, and that you're an on-time payer, or whatever other sort of factors you can put in place to kind of push back on some of those pricing considerations. And there may be even an offer to discount if you're ordering a certain number of products. So maybe you change the volume game a little bit. Again, that's dependent on cash on hand, I'm sure, lines of credit, and do you have storage available? And finally, if it's non-perishable, obviously you don't want to have a bunch of waste inventory on hand as well. All right. Consider reshoring. This is a topic that typically arises during tariffs, and in some ways, it's part of the policy move. Is by creating tariffs, do you create more incentive to manufacture here or to source here in the U.S.? And so, part of your consideration, again, depending on product mix, maybe are there other sort of suppliers or even like craft suppliers. I mean, I think as we look at, the Main Street world, there is a growing list of market for small scale producers, small scale manufacturers. Does that give you, in some ways, a value add if you're able to position, pivot to more of, U.S. based or Main Street based small scale producers? You may have some ebb and flows on inventory, so that's always a consideration, the consistency of the product. But it also may give you some brand advantages by having U.S. based products, being able to tell a story, have more of an experience through your product mix. And so I think you're weighing in some cases, the pricing, the reliance on the inventory, as well as what can it bring that's new, or may build in more margin or pricing elasticity with the consumer because it is locally made. So always sort of like the weighing the considerations there in terms of how reshoring may impact your overall business model. Next up, let's talk about how to limit perhaps some other expenses and even potential investments. So we've talked more on the inventory side and how to deal with that, margins, or pricing elasticity from the consumer, the buyer. But another way is can we think about other controls on our expenses? Okay, so while one expense is going up, that on your inventory, can you cut in other ways? And for instance, can you hold out perhaps on an equipment purchase or sort of like capital assets or renovation projects that you were looking to make, or even like fixtures and furnishings, some of these big or larger capital expenses? I'm sure that's part of the equation, given sort of the uncertainty of the tariffs, how that might impact your margins, as well as what's happening. If you saw the 2025 prediction show that I did a couple weeks ago, we'll put it in the show links. I talked about some concerns around consumer spending and pullbacks in consumer spending. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the market. Tariffs certainly add to that and sort of complicate your business model. And so I think this is a biggie, just to reduce risk, exposure, and in some ways free up, hopefully cash, or the availability, depending on how you may need to maneuver versus being tied up in a big project or something along those lines. So I think that will be key. And then the other, obviously, the other big expense for most businesses is on the labor side. And we're already starting to see some of that impact with some layoffs in certain industries. And, uh, and so that has to be part of the consideration. You may be in growth mode and need to scale. But otherwise, how do you think and sort of balance the labor side, which again tends to be one of the more expensive, if not the most expensive side of your business, unless of course you're a solopreneur or something along those lines. All right, we'll talk a little bit about communicating with your customers. I think this is really important in turn, especially given Main Street, a lot of our Main Street businesses, there's this close, I think, connection. That's what makes, in many ways, the Main Street world so special, and small businesses on Main Street so special, is that connection they have with their consumers. There's a trust, there's a built-in bond and relationship, and I think during difficult times, much like you likely experienced during the pandemic, it helps to communicate. It helps to be transparent. I think when consumers recognize that, a business is having to deal with, certain problems, issues, challenges, they can be more accepting. And in fact, I think what we saw coming out of the pandemic is frankly, there's just a great affinity that the small businesses that you have in your community are sort of a quality of place, a quality of life component, a factor in their livability, much like a great school system or having parks and trails or great civic institutions or what have you. Small businesses are a really important part of that. They make our lives better. They give us places to hang out or see our friends or get a great service or what have you. And so communicating with them, even in a challenging period, or even talking about pricing increases, I think is a lot better and will get you further in terms of maintaining that bond and perhaps even strengthening the consumer desire to support the store because you have. So I think what you do is you not only talk about the challenges, but you emphasize the pros of what you are offering, where it's the quality, the uniqueness, the experience, really the differentiating features of your product, or your service that really can sort of move beyond the price increase. Okay, that you're making sure that the features that you're presenting don't get in, the pricing increase doesn't get in the way of that. So where they're only thinking about price and just choosing sort of transaction over the experience. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the next one, which is really about streamlining or simplifying your operations. Okay. And here, I think what you're trying to do really is just review your current operations and identify areas where maybe you can build some efficiencies and make some improvements. And one big example that really comes to mind for me, and we saw this in the food and beverage industry back during the pandemic. If you think about some of your restaurants, your local restaurants or whatever, you may recall that many of them began to kind of like simplify their menu because supply chains were disrupted in many ways. You could never really count on what was going to be delivered, what inventory was going to be on hand. And so rather than have a lot of options, they really just sort of simplified and streamlined from a menu. And I think that same learning can be applied to lots of different business types, where you can really save on overhead cost by maybe just lessening some of the inventory that you've got on hand. Obviously, you need to bring in sort of a design component if you're going to make that decision, because you don't want to look empty is well, but you may have to pull back on some of that and then think about, like, from an interior design perspective, how do I still create a nice environment and an experience, even though I might not have a big bulk of supply as you might typically do. So think about, from an interior design, maybe some more storytelling, or think about, could I perhaps enhance the store by inviting a micropreneur to have a pop-up inside the store. So I've got other activity happening there. So I think there's a lot of different ways you could get creative as you're, simplifying inventory or streamlining operations to still create a great environment in order to, keep the consumers coming in and creating that experience that gives maybe settles some of that pricing issues and challenges you might be having. All right, let's move on. I won't claim to be a tariff expert by any means. So, always think about seeking professional assistance, and that might come in the form of your local small business development center or SCORE, the Service Corps of Retired Executives, that provide a lot of great counseling, often free or low cost training as well. They're there for you. So, look them up at your local SBDC or local SCORE office. And if you're trying to think through this and want to talk with someone about it, they're great resources. They're great partners of Main Street, and can't speak highly of them enough about the work that they do. And so please reach out. Also, you might have your own financial advisor or an accountant to kind of help you to review kind of where you're at, cash on hand, what your margins are. Just become smarter about how the operation is flowing, where you might be able to make cuts, or as I talked about before, streamline so that you can take in some of these pricing increases without having to do a lot of price increase for the consumer, passing that on if you're concerned about that, or you're able to adjust margins in some way. So again, plenty of advice out there. Reach out. And I think the other big thing, if you can, this sort of goes along with seeking out the professional advice, is leverage your trade associations and networks. They are often obviously there to support their members, as well as take in from other businesses like yours what's happening. And not every business is the same, obviously. And so certain businesses may be more impacted based on their typology or characteristics. And so, turning to your trade association is going to have that real insight into your particular business. You're in the apparel business or the restaurant business, or a fitness center or what have you. Always turn to them to see what's going on within your particular marketplace. Okay. All right. The other thing is, and again, this sort of picks up on what we learned in the pandemic, is, the ability to stay agile, be adaptable is a key strength and characteristic to embed sort of in your business model and practice. The discussions around, if you've been following the media, the discussions around tariffs, are frankly kind of a moving target. And, we were 12 hours away from 25% on Mexico and Canada, and then things shifted. There hasn't been a ton of dialogue around the impacts on with China and the 10%, but who knows, more could be coming, or the European Union, or Mexico and Canada could come back in less than 30 days. And so I think the key is stay informed, but also be able to shift when you need to. It's always wise, no matter if it's tariffs or any other a challenge. It could be a natural disaster or what have you. Is to plan ahead, have that action plan in place. If this happens, this is what I'm going to do. And I know sometimes as a small business owner, it can be difficult to find the time to be strategic, to think ahead, but it's way more expensive to not take the time. Now is when it does occur. That's when it really gets expensive. Make your mistakes earlier on, because as time goes on, it definitely gets more expensive. So tariffs and trade policies can change quickly. And so be prepared to be agile enough to pivot to whether it's new suppliers, rethinking markets. There were a lot of people during the pandemic that shifted, for instance, from B2C markets to, B2B, went wholesaling, wholesaling revenue lines, or shifted products, brought in new inventory. So there's lots of things that kind of are on the menu of what you can do, and hopefully some of those were presented here as well for you to kind of think through. So make the time so that you don't make all the mistakes when it's really expensive. And then finally, before I wrap up, I'll just share that, like the SBDCs and scores and many other, there's a ton of small business support and resources out there. We at Main Street America, if you go to mainstreet.org, can find a host of resources, other podcasts, learn from your other businesses, and videos from our digital trainers, where you can gain insights and check up on new news sort of coming out on our small business support page, and subscribe to that to get updates by leaving your email. So go to the pages, subscribe, and you'll get additional resources. For instance, we just put out the Retail Matters 2024, chock full of trends and data points within a whole host, from what's happening in consumerism, where are business trends going in the economy, what about workforce, finance, even AI, where's artificial intelligence going? So a huge resource. So go and check that out as well as you sort of layer on these resources. And then finally, you can also review, as I mentioned, my 2025 small business trend predictions as we look the year ahead. And I talk a little bit about tariffs in that, but in terms of more holistically other challenge points that we might want to consider in the retail side or small business side as we sort of wrap that up. All right, so that's going to do it for my sort of 12 tips for dealing with tariffs, ways that you can shift, ways you can navigate tariffs as a small business owner along our main street. So that's going to do it. And as always, if you're a small business owner, and likewise to my place professionals out there that might be listening, I hope this episode has provided plenty of new insights, solutions, and inspiration. And as consumers, please continue to support your local small businesses and, of course, tell their stories. That's the power of what we can accomplish together as a community that loves our small businesses, loves our main streets, and wants to ensure that they're as competitive as the big folks out there, whether you're Walmart or Amazon or what have you. But we've got to do this as a community. And so please support them. They're really part of the quality of place and the places we all call home. So as you think about this, also, I hope that you'll check out our shopmainstreet.org, show your Main Street pride, show you love your downtowns and your neighborhood commercial districts, of course. So you can go to shopmainstreet.org for that. And finally, remember to check out, as I mentioned, our growing library of podcast recordings and other related films, of course, on the Main Street America YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. And, I would also please subscribe, hit that subscribe button. That helps to make things shine, whether it's on the iTunes or Spotify or, of course, the YouTube channel. It's a way for us to spread this message even broader, but it takes all of you to do that. So we'll try to do our part. Please help us out. Please subscribe, leave a review, ask a question. My email is mwagner@mainstreet.org. So if you've got a comment or question and we want to feature it on the show, please send it my way. Would love to hear from all of you. So thanks for listening again, and we'll see you the next time.